Welcome to the Eunice Factor. I'm Eunice Russell. In today's segment, we're going to talk about propositions and deceptive advertising. We're going to take a look at the two top advertisements in the state of California. Now, you can take what I'm saying and apply it to any state, but I'm using California because that's where I am and that's what I'm familiar with. But the way that we're going to cut through these ads and try to identify any deception or just questions that you should ask yourself can be applied anywhere. So the first proposition we're going to look at is a statewide proposition. It's Proposition 22. And a yes vote on Proposition 22 will allow companies like Uber and Lyft to hire drivers as independent contractors. The drivers will be able to set their own schedules and their own times and when and where they want to work. A no vote would mean that the companies, the app-based companies like Uber and Lyft, would have to hire drivers as employees, giving them at least minimum wage and benefits. Now, excuse me, we've seen tons of ads on this here in California. So many ads, and what you need to understand is with every ad, those are millions of dollars that are being spent, okay? Millions of dollars. And so you have to look at, one, who's backing this particular position. Now, Uber and Lyft are the main campaign contributors to this yes vote because they will profit from it. If they have to hire employees, then they'll have to give benefits unless they allow part-time employees, and then they won't get any benefits, and they'll probably make minimum wage. The way it stands now as independent contractors, of course, they get to work their own hours. But one of the problems is that they don't get to set the rate at which they're going to work those hours. Now, most independent contractors can set their own rate, okay? If they want to charge $50 an hour or whatever it is, or so many cents a mile, however they decide to charge, they should be able to charge that. Now, there are parameters for that in certain fields as to knowing what sells. But Uber and Lyft, and I think Postmates and all those others that use these independent drivers, they set the rate. And one of the problems that I hear from these drivers is that they don't make enough money to really survive doing it. They just make enough to keep going to the next week. So it's a toss-up. But when you look at how much money Uber and Lyft are spending not to have these people as employees, not to hire the drivers as employees, and I haven't heard anything about them talking with the drivers and trying to figure out a standard starting rate, and if there's some kind of length of time where they can increase that rate that they're willing to pay to the drivers, because I think that's important. It's very important nowadays for people to make a minimum wage, at least a living wage, especially going through this pandemic and the level of unemployment. There are going to be numerous people trying to subsidize their income. And the benefit of scheduling when and where and how you work is great. But on the other hand, are people really making enough money? And we're not hearing anything from any of the drivers, other than the ads that have been placed there. I haven't heard anything on the no side of it other than what's placed in the booklet. So you kind of got to look at it. Are we helping the drivers if we vote no? Are we helping to provide them and their families with at least a base wage where they can get some health insurance and live? Or do we let them continue on their own? It's sort of like being a union for drivers. If we decide that they should be employees, then we're making that decision for them. If we decide that the company wins, are we allowing the companies to get away with not paying their employees enough money. So it's a choice of conscience. But again, I say you have to look at how much money is being spent to convince you to vote a certain way. And usually when there's too much money being thrown around, it's not always a good thing. So for me, in my opinion, that sort of makes me lean toward no, because I see how much money that they're pouring into this. And having talked to some drivers personally, and knowing that they haven't been able to make a real living on as driving Uber and Lyft, that also affects my decision. But again, you got to look at who's supporting these measures and what they have to gain. Now, the next measure that has a lot of controversy surrounding them is Measure 23, and that is establishing state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics, and it requires an on-site medical professional initiative statute. That's the name of the statute. Now, they have been pouring millions of dollars, and when I say they, I'm talking about the three top dialysis companies in the state of California. They have poured millions of dollars into their commercial ads. Every channel, every time there's a commercial, you've got somebody on air talking about they're going to die if they don't get dialysis. Now, I don't mean to sound cruel. Both my mother and sister were dialysis patients, so I totally understand that dialysis is, if you need it, you have to have it, or yes, you will die. But the question here becomes, will you die because of this measure? Now, everyone's saying that if you vote yes on this, it will force clinics to close. Why will it force clinics to close? Well, here's the real deal about Proposition 23. It's asking that all of these dialysis units have a doctor on site when they're giving patients dialysis. So what that means is now they don't have to have one. That means that at all these dialysis units, there's only technicians there, or could be there. That then it's not mandated that they have to have a doctor. Well, that will increase cost for the dialysis unit owners, because you're looking at the doctor's salary, any pension, and you multiply that by each clinic that they have. Boom, a lot of cost. Now, will that put them out of business? I don't know. But is their profit margin greater than the treatment that the patients need to be given? Now, there's been questions as to the treatment of some patients, especially in lower income areas, and the treatment and the cleanliness of the clinics. And so this Proposition 23 requires a certain level or certain change in the sanitation programs that go along with also requiring the doctor. So the truth is, yes, those patients that you see on there will die if they don't get dialysis. Is it true that they'll die if you pass Proposition 23? I don't think so. That would be on each of those companies as to how they want to, will they maintain businesses in those areas? Will the cost be too great? Or is it reasonable to ask that these companies have a professional doctor on duty at the time that people are receiving their dialysis treatment? And should these facilities be clean to a certain standard? I say, as having family that were dialysis patients, that everyone deserves good care. I would be afraid if I knew that my mother was at a dialysis unit and there was no doctor on call, that if something happened, if she had a heart attack or whatever, or something went wrong with the machines, her kidneys, or something went in flux, that they would have to wait on an ambulance or 911 or somebody of that caliber to come and aid. I don't know exactly how much a technician knows in relation to dialysis, but I know that it can't be equivalent to that of a doctor. And there's a reason that they're asking that a doctor be required. And this isn't the first time that this has come before. So it's a problem. And when you look at who's behind these measures, who's spending the money on these measures, that tells you a lot. These three large companies are spending millions of dollars in commercial ads, and those ads are pulling at your heartstrings. Of course you don't want to see anyone die. Of course you want everyone to get good dialysis care. And no, you don't want your vote to be the cause of anyone's death or the close of a facility. But you've never heard in one of those commercials exactly what would cause them to die, exactly why the facilities would be closed. No information at all, none whatsoever, just something to pull on your heartstrings. So things like that make me think that it's deceptive. Not that it's not totally true. Yes, there's some truth to what they say, but what are the parts that they're not saying? What are they not talking about in this proposition? And those are the real issues. I would be more inclined to have dealt with it, voting no on it, if the owners of the dialysis came forward and honestly said, look, we have 10,000 facilities throughout California, and to hire a professional at each one of those facilities would bankrupt us. I could deal with that. That makes sense to me as a person. But to have all of these dialysis patients come on and say, oh, I'm going to die if I don't get dialysis, and not give you any real information, that's deceptive. That's that omission, that's where they skip telling you what's really going on. So because of that, that makes me lean to the other direction to say no. That quality care, as far as I can see, unless they explain why they shouldn't have a doctor at their facilities when they're giving dialysis treatments, that's what they should have been talking about. If they wanted you to vote in favor of this, they should have been talking about why a doctor isn't necessary, or why they feel that the facilities and the standard of care that they're giving meet state requirements and state law. But no, they didn't do that. They didn't address those things. What they did was address issues that affect your level of compassion. But we have to get beyond that. We live in a generation of trickeration, so you cannot rely on just what you see in these commercials. You really have to think about not only what are they saying to you, but what aren't they saying? What are the facts that they're giving? And if it's in opposition, where are both sides at? If you're not hearing from the other side, it's probably because they don't have any money, and it's some common person just like you or me that took it a step further and took it as far as they could, but they just don't have the money to meet the advertising costs. So that's why we have to do our part. We can't continue to go out with slate mailers, those little cards that's sent to you by your union or by your council person, or just made up by some group of who you should vote for and what measures you should vote for. We can't continue to do that. We have to look at what's in our own best interest. Sometimes, even the political officials, our elected officials, they get caught up. They get caught up and pressured into doing things that are not necessarily in the best interest of their constituents, because they're either trying to stay in office, and these special interest groups are threatening their tenure in office. So it is up to us, the American citizens, the voting population, it is up to us to look a little beyond what we're told. Let's not be led like sheep to the slaughter. Because even the nicest serial killer smiles and looks gracious. Look at Ted Bundy and some of those folks. They didn't look crazy. So you can't tell a lot by a person's personality. And I was listening to TBN the other night, and they had a show. It was a father-son, and it was on elections. And they gave some good information, but where they faltered is they said you have to deal with the party platform. That's only a part of it. Because even though groups say that they're about a certain thing, you have to look at the fruit that they're bearing. You have to look at what's going on, not just with their lip service, but what they're actually putting into action. So we have an obligation to research, to look deep. And for those of us who are Christians, we must pray. Not to be right, but to be led in the right direction. That our eyes, ears, and hearts are open to truth. We can't be lazy about this. Too many lives are at stake. So this is just on these two measures. Come back and watch it for our next segment. We're going to go over a couple of more measures until we get them all through. I just don't want to cram them into one video and kind of bore and tire you out. So this was Proposition 22 and 23. We're going to go through all of them, even the local measures, and we're going to look at some of the political candidates, the debates, and a variety of things. So stay tuned. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a lot more to come. I'm Eunice Russell, and thank you for watching The Eunice Factor.